Hello everyone, I usually start the week with Shavua Tov, but this week, as it's Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av, the week in which Tisha B'Av falls, if things don't change, I'm just going to say, may it be a Shavua Tov, and may we hear Besorot Tovot in these days turned into feast days and not fast days. Today's keynote speaker, number 10, dedicated to the memory of Lucy Maya and Rina D, as always. We get to the kina of Vayukonen Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu was a righteous king, which was rare at the time. From 8 years old, he became king, because that's the way it works. Kings become kings when their father dies. And he was a righteous king, and he really tried to start a mass movement in Israel for get everyone to become religious, and it failed. And I'd like to point out 2 reasons why it failed that the kina talks about. Number 1, because of the people. It says in the kina, Davak bo chet leitzanei hador, asher kamu acharei hadelet lizgor. Namely, he would come into the homes to check if there's avodah zarah, if there's idol worship, and what they would do, they would open the door and say, here, look, there's nothing, there's just sfarim, there's a mezuzah. But behind the door, the place he couldn't see, because when you open the door, you don't see behind the door, that's where their pesel, that's where their idol was. In other words, people were cynical about his attempt to get everyone to come back to Torah. And when you're cynical, you usually don't see the value of anything. Anything someone tells you, you find to be valueless. And the first thing we have to learn from this kina is to stop being cynical. Let's just say as a joke, you can be a little cynical. But to be cynical as a way of life only brings destruction. Number 2, Yoshiyahu tried something that I have to admit was impossible. You cannot go ahead and get people to change their behavior and their religious belief by force, by making an edict that everyone has to be Shomer Shabbos, by making an edict that no one can eat chametz, by making an edict that everyone has to bris their children. When you make edicts, usually you have a counter-reaction. And that's exactly what happened at the time. So with the greatest intentions in the world, Yoshiyahu, a righteous king, getting a whole kina by Yirmiyahu, failed because of those 2 reasons. Number 1, people were cynical. And number 2, he tried and failed to do something by virtue of edicts and not by virtue of inspiration and not by virtue of influencing. And therefore, as we get closer to Tisha B'Av, I hope we take these 2 lessons to heart. Number 1, to stop being cynical. It usually doesn't lead anywhere. And number 2, to not think that by force you can change people's outlook. Wishing everyone a substantial day.